It's a pleasure and an incredible honor to be here. SACNAS has been an influence on me for so long. My first SACNAS conference, I think, was in 1988. And I have such fond memories of so many of the people that are here in the room and the way that they've influenced me. I have Eloy Rodriguez's poster on my wall, La Ciencia de los Chiles. I don't know if anybody remembers that particular talk, but they made a poster out of it. I also have fond memories of George Castro, year after year, mortgaging his house to make sure that the SACNAS conference can come together. I feel like I was among giants when I was still just an undergraduate student. And the commitment that people had at that time and just the incredible community that was built has just stayed with me since. So even though the last SACNAS conference I think I attended was maybe about 10 years ago, this feels like home. I'm a professor in mathematics education, and when I think about it, I get to develop teachers through my work with doctoral students. I help build the future leaders and professors in mathematics education. And every day that I wake up, I think, I love what I'm doing, and I wouldn't ever do anything differently. I would do this even if I wasn't paid. So I want to talk about a couple of things, one of which is belonging. So I didn't always belong in mathematics education. I began my career with a degree in biology from Stanford University, thinking I was going to become a pediatrician. I ignored all the signals that in all of my free time I was tutoring other students in mathematics through programs like MESA and Upward Bound. And I worked at Stanford Hospital in critical care transport, getting organs from donors to those who desperately needed them. So there I was applying to medical schools, filling out secondary applications. And then this professor challenged me. He was a professor in education, and I was forced to take an education course. At Stanford at that time, they wanted you to be well-rounded, so even though I was majoring in biology, they forced you to take courses that were in art and religion or morality. And so every time I was forced to take one of those kinds of courses, I remember the morality course, I took bioethics, or anytime you were forced to do something, I found some way to squeeze it into my narrow view that this was going to help me in medical school. So I was forced to take this education course, and this professor said to me at the end of the course, he said, Rochelle, you could make a fine doctor. He said, you're smart, you're determined, you're analytical, but why don't you try something really challenging, like education? Nobody had ever talked to me about education like that before. And it wasn't until I had the opportunity to teach students in a migrant education program one summer that my light turned on, and I said, I knew this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I found SACNAS that year, and I felt a sense of belonging to a larger movement. And as long as mathematics continues to be a gatekeeper in society for the sciences, for full participation in a highly technological and information-based society, and as long as it's used to support warfare and economics oppressing other countries, my place is here in education. Throughout my career, I've faced a number of challenges. I've had people who've told me that I don't belong in the academy, some outright in the sense that you fill a quota, and others more subtly, citing, for example, the number of people that didn't get tenure before me in mathematics education. I think there was 18 years before me that somebody had gotten tenured at my university in mathematics education. As an undergraduate, I was constantly asked what were my SAT scores. And at the time, I guess I would remind people, not remind them, you wouldn't know, 3% of the population at Stanford the time I was there was minority. So all African American, Latino, Native American, anybody, 3% of the population. We weren't very many. And I was constantly asked my SAT scores, and kind of implying that maybe I was part of some quota. And I had to develop out of that system some way to cope with all of the kind of pressures that I felt like people were implying somehow that, yeah, I got in, and then did I take other biology courses than they did, or was I given special exams that they weren't given? I was often asked what was the perspective of Mexicans. This question came to me a lot in terms of, well, what do Mexicans think about, and then you can fill in, about immigration rights or something. And I got to the point where I got so tired of trying to be a voice for somehow the Mexican community that was at school with me, that I developed what I call snappy answers to stupid questions, which those of you that know Mad Magazine, did you grow up with Mad Magazine, you know snappy answers to stupid questions. So I started to develop ways of countering that with some humor. And one of the ways I did that was to say, well, at our last meeting of Mexicans, I think the vote was 84 to 73 that we feel this way about this particular policy. In graduate school, I was continued to be challenged about my place in the academy. I had a professor, a major professor in mathematics education who was world-renowned, and I went to him to ask for a letter of recommendation. And he said to me very clearly, well, you're not going to have any problems getting a job with your last name, implying that somehow my research wouldn't carry any weight and that some university would be happy to take me to fulfill some diversity quota. So it was 15 years later when just this past January, we were at a math conference together, and the look on his face was incredible because he recognized that we were both giving plenary sessions at the same conference, and we were switching podiums. I said, I said to him, I don't know if you remember me, and he just looked down and kind of said, yeah, I remember you. So I've been told a lot of things. I was also, when I was applying for jobs, one of my first job interviews was at Vanderbilt University. And one of the questions I got asked was, I was doing research on equity in mathematics education, and there was concern. This was a position in mathematics education they had advertised. And they wanted to know, well, what percentage of you is really math education, and what percentage of you is these equity issues? Like, in your future research, are you going to continue to do work in mathematics education? As if somehow there was this notion that you could separate the two. And so I said, well, I think 34% of me is math education, 12% is Latina, 11% is, and that was how I dealt with it. I've been told a lot of things along the way as a professor as well, but I just keep plugging away at my research, finding questions that speak to me, methodologies that match my moral obligations to the community, and opportunities to influence the next generation of scholars. So in my field, I'm most known for the work I do in equity issues in mathematics, focusing on fairness, not sameness, and challenging people to think not just about K through 12 classrooms, but also about the relationship between mathematics and humanity on this planet. In my work, there are 4 dimensions to equity. There's access, and in access, it relates to the tangible resources that students have available to them to participate in mathematics. These resources include such things as quality mathematics teachers, adequate technology, supplies in the classroom, a rigorous curriculum, a classroom environment that invites participation, reasonable class sizes, and support for learning outside of class hours. The access dimension reflects the predominant equity mindset of math educators in the 1980s, that students were affected by their opportunity to learn, and it continues today in more nuanced forms. However, a focus on access is a necessary but insufficient condition to approach equity, in part because equal access assumes sameness, when we know that we have a history of differential treatment and discrimination in the United States. So beyond opportunities to learn, we also care about outcomes, or what I categorize as achievement. This dimension is measured by tangible results for students at all levels of mathematics. Achievement involves participation in a given class, course-taking patterns, standardized test scores, and participation in the math pipeline, majoring in mathematics in college, having a math-based career, among other things. Moving from mere access to achievement is important when considering that there are serious economic and social consequences for not having enough math credits to graduate from high school, not scoring high enough on a standardized achievement test to gain acceptance to college, or not being able to major in a math-based field that can confer a higher salary and prestige in society. The achievement dimension was most prominent in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when a greater emphasis was placed on standardized test scores, and continues today into the more narrowly defined achievement gap, which my research also challenges. However, because there's a danger of students having to downplay some of their personal, cultural, or linguistic capacities in order to participate in the classroom or the math pipeline, and because, as I said, some groups of students have historically experienced more great discrimination in schools, issues of identity have started to play a larger role in equity research in mathematics education. Most of this work has come from scholars of color. Students should be able to become better persons in their own eyes, not just in the eyes of others. So this is kind of what I call, do I get to become a better me, or do I have to become you? For most mathematics educators, identity issues might include understanding mathematics as a cultural practice in ways that might further develop the appreciation of one's roots. Examples of this approach are present in ethnomathematics programs. But we cannot stop there, as identity is much more than one's past. More centrally, the identity dimension itself concerns itself with a balance between self and others. A window mirror metaphor is useful here. So what I talk about in a window mirror is that students have the opportunities to both see themselves reflected in the curriculum, as well as have a view onto a broader world. So seeing the self is the mirror, and the view of the broader world is the window. For example, using mathematics to analyze social justice issues might offer a mirror to students who have been marginalized by society, while it provides a window to students who benefit from the status quo. Identity incorporates the question of whether students find mathematics not just real world, as defined by textbooks and teachers, but also meaningful to their lives. It includes whether students have opportunities to draw upon their cultural and linguistic resources, such as other languages and dialects, algorithms from their home countries, different frames of reference, when they're doing mathematics. As such, we need to pay attention to the context of schooling and to whose perspective is socially valorized. The goal is not to replace traditional mathematics with a predefined, culturally relevant mathematics in an essentialistic way, but rather to strike a balance between the number of windows and mirrors provided to any given student in his career. However, even if students have access to quality mathematics, achieve a higher standard of academic outcomes as defined by the status quo, and have opportunities to be themselves and better themselves while doing so, if we still live in an unjust society, having the ability to participate greater in that unjust society doesn't really address equity for me. So the final piece is power. The power dimension takes up issues of social transformation at many levels. This dimension could be measured in voice in the classroom, as in who gets to talk, who decides the curriculum. Opportunities for students to use math as an analytical tool to critique society, for example, exploring risk in society, looking at the criminalization of youth and comparing that with statistics. It involves alternative notions of knowledge, rethinking the field of mathematics as a more humanistic enterprise, and recognizing that math needs people, not just people need math. Much of the equity research frames things from the point of view of almost that deficit perspective, that, well, we need to get more people into the field of mathematics because they're going to need to participate in this economic society, rather than that they have something different to offer the field of mathematics. So for the most part, access and achievement can be thought of as comprising this dominant lens, this dominant axis. And by dominant, it's not changing. By dominant mathematics, I mean the mathematics that reflects the status quo in society, that gets valued in high-stakes testing and credentialing, that privileges a static formalism, and that is involved in making sense of a world that favors the views and perspectives of a relatively elite group. These are the components students will need to be able to show mastery in the discipline as it is currently defined and to participate economically in society. This axis, where access is a precursor to achievement, measures how well students know how to play the game of mathematics. On the other hand, identity and power make up the critical axis. By critical, I mean mathematics that squarely acknowledges the position of students as members of a community rife with issues of power and domination. Critical mathematics takes students' cultural identities and builds mathematics around them in ways that addresses social and political issues in society, especially highlighting the perspectives of marginalized groups and their ways of viewing the world. It's the mathematics that challenges static formalism as is embedded in a tradition that favors the West. And it's the critical axis that ensures that students' frames of reference and resources are acknowledged in ways that help build critical citizens. This axis builds on the idea that mathematics is a human practice, and it's a practice that reflects the agendas, priorities, and framings that participants bring to it. As such, a diverse body of people are needed to practice mathematics, not just to build a 21st century workforce, as I said before, but so that they might participate democratically. And moreover, mathematics needs a diverse body of people so that the field can sustain itself in the most vibrant way possible. To be clear, all four dimensions are necessary. If we are to have true equity, learning dominant mathematics may be necessary for students to be able to critically analyze the world, while being able to critically analyze the world may engage students to learn dominant mathematics, so one can be an entry into the other. It's not enough to learn how to play the game. Students must be also able to change the game. But changing the game requires being able to play it well enough to be taken seriously. As science concerned with equity and leadership, we must keep in mind all four dimensions, even if that means that at times one or two dimensions temporarily shift to the background. A natural tension exists between mastering the dominant frame while learning to vary or challenge that frame. I remember conversations that I had with Thurman Hornbuckle, who was a leader in SACNAS and has since passed. He talked so passionately about the incredible effort that it took to keep balance in his work, trying to ask himself when he should listen to indigenous ways of knowing and how to communicate any of that with people in the lab. As such, access, achievement, identity, and power are not going to be equally or fully present in any given situation. So for examples, when I do work with teachers, I remind them that they cannot address power issues every day in the classroom in ways that are meaningful to every student. And similarly, when identity or power issues are being brought to the surface, at times the connection to mastering dominant mathematics or science has to take a lower priority. The goal is to attend to and measure all four dimensions over time. So over the years, as my work has progressed, I've continued to look to disciplinary frames that are not used in mathematics education to explain phenomena that are of interest to me. The work of Gloria Ansaldúa, especially her notions of conocimiento and nepantla, have helped me to create a language to talk about different ways of conceptualizing knowledge in education. And while I'm not going to go deeply into what that means in terms of mathematics teacher education, I'm going to use the notion of nepantla to talk about our role here in SACNAS. So what is nepantla? Nepantla, I've been told, is also associated with a place of water. But what it means is a dream space. It's between realities. For Ansaldúa, who was a lesbian Chicana feminist writer, who was accepted by neither the Chicano community that typically outcasts gays and lesbians, nor by her white feminist scholars, she used this space to argue that it was a place to facilitate transformation. And I think about that because I think of the worlds that I've had to traverse. So for me, living in Nepantla means belonging and not belonging. As a child, I was not Chicana enough for my sisters, who rebelled against a system that devalued our heritage. And I was too Mexican for my classmates in the gifted program that I participated in. My research has been seen as not cognitive enough by mainstream mathematics educators, and therefore read as primitive. And at the same light, as a faculty member in Latino Studies, my work has been seen as too cognitive, read primitive. So Nepantla is this space where you can be kind of the neither and the both. Nepantla means being highly visible and invisible, as in we're used as diversity pawns in our universities, but we're unacknowledged at meetings of importance. As I said, it's existing in the neither here nor there. We live in the cracks between realities. It's being the oppressor and the oppressed. So using Spanish to reclaim my indigenous roots, even while knowing that Spanish represents the very colonization of my ancestors. It's dealing with this uncertainty, this ambiguity, and the internal contradictions that allow me to be who I am. And what I'm arguing for is that we reclaim that notion of Nepantla, that we claim that space. We come from a long line of Nepantleras and Nepantleros. Most of us live our lives in Nepantla, belonging but not belonging at the same time. Again, we feel both visible and invisible, required to be border crossers at most junctions of our professional lives. So shape-shifting. So topology is a branch of mathematics that many of you are familiar with, and it means that in some geometric problems, they're not dependent on an exact shape. There's homeomorphisms. So there's a continuous stretching and bending into a new shape, stretching in a space without tearing. And I think about how that applies to our lives, required to stretch without losing our essence or ripping apart our identity. I've had to shapeshift to transform myself into dream, into la naguala, as Gloria Anzaldúa writes about, so that I might visit other worlds while my soul remains intact. Being la naguala, I am a spy in graduate school, learning my opponent's conservative theoretical frameworks and methods so that I might counter them or use them against others at a later point. When I was in graduate school, we were forced to learn, master at least 2 languages, and they wouldn't allow me to use Spanish as a language. So I was forced to learn, I argued to learn statistics as a second language, and that counted somehow. And now I have statistics kind of in that back pocket so that when people try to look at my work and say, why aren't you using the statistics, or if they try to present a quantitative argument, that I can tear it down. I visit the academy, and it does not define me, yet I know I am the academy, I embody it. I speak in forbidden tongues, raising issues with a theoretical lens of the achievement gap when others see this as the answer to greater equity issues among US students. I suggest we need to learn from Mexican mathematics classrooms when others are fixated on models from Asia. Only when we come to conferences like SACNAS do we exhale and know that we can gather the shards of ourselves like the ancient Coyolxauhqui who was dismembered. So in all of this work, we're trying not to become Coyolxauhqui. So I'm arguing that we embrace Nepantla. For me, I have found solace and strength in knowing that I am a Nepantlera, that generations came before me and fought for this place of nowhere and everywhere. I'm familiar with uncertainty, and that gives me the ability to withhold judgment, to see a new possible future, a new way of doing mathematics and science that does not yet exist. I say to myself, we don't need no stinking badges. I don't need permission from others to do what I do. When I'm frustrated, challenged, or told I do not have a place in the academy, I remember that I am, in the words of Gloria Anzaldúa, indigenous like corn. Like corn, the mestiza is a product of crossbreeding, designed for preservation under a variety of conditions. Like an ear of corn, a female seed-bearing organ, la mestiza is tenacious, tightly wrapped in the husks of her culture. Like kernels, she clings to the cob with thick stalks and strong braced roots. She holds tight to the earth. She will survive the crossroads. She is the green shoot that cracks the rock. She will abide. I've started to do some research on the history of mathematics, looking for points in time when new forms of mathematics have developed and how they might relate to the identity of the researcher or researchers involved. My theory is that when new people are brought into the field of mathematics, new forms of mathematics will develop that shift the definition of mathematics. After all, mathematics is a human practice. It cannot exist without those who embody it. We know from science that in times of war, when men left their labs to women, new forms of chemistry developed. I think the most obvious examples for the everyday public is pioneers in behavioral science like Jane Goodall and Diane Fossey, who took new approaches to studying chimpanzees and apes. So while others were busy trying to be objective observers, they became the apes. They became the chimpanzees. I ignore the deficit perspectives that others tell me about why we need more Latinos, or Native Americans in the sciences, that we cannot afford to have an illiterate workforce, that our sheer numbers are increasing, that our economy depends on it. We know as Nepantleras and Nepantleros that we have a unique skill. We are the border crossers of this world. We are the future. As people who deal with shifting realities, we draw on our ability to shapeshift, stretching the imagination, envisioning a more socially just world. We are poised to solve complex scientific problems in a global society, rewriting science as we go. And I say, vámonos. Thank you.